Good morning, everyone. Bonjour, chers collègues. Bună dimineața. We are going to start the last panel of our conference. I would like to thank you once again for being present in Bucharest and accepting our invitation. We are starting a panel which we consider quite ambitious one because it's proposing in the same time three sub-items. First of all, of course, we are going to discuss about Balkans. It's natural. It's about the continuity of a project that we are extremely supportive, the enlargement, the integration of the Balkans. It's coming as a natural follow-up after the Bulgarian presidency of the EU Council and after the Austrian presidency. It's the same position of Romania, and I think it's a broader interest as concerns the Balkans. Secondly, it's about the Eastern neighborhood. We are celebrating 10 years of the anniversary of 10 years of Eastern Partnership, about the past, about the future, what will be the future of the Eastern Partnership, and about those partners which are interested, really interested and committed within the European project. Last but not least, it's about the Euro-Atlantic ties. It's a topic that we consider extremely important when discussing about the future of Europe. Usually we concentrate in our discussions when discussing about the future of Europe on the inside the story within the European Union, within our nations, our domestic priorities, domestic social, economic, political priorities, the expectations of our people. What about the external dimension? What about, in this case, our neighborhood, the neighborhood of our region? This is why Romania proposed in this conference to look on the neighborhood of our Central Southeast European region, about the Balkans, about the Eastern neighborhood. And I think it's a good moment to change a little bit the philosophy that now we are going to propose you. When discussing about candidates, about associated members, about our partners, usually it's us, the EU member states, that we are talking, sometimes too much. We are saying what you should do, how you should do. What are the criteria, the fact that you should deliver, you should work more for more. Sometimes we are hearing now less for less, which is not the very encouraging attitude. We are asking to our partners to make efforts, to make reforms, sometimes painful reforms, sometimes costly reforms from a budgetary point of view, but also from a political point of view. In some cases, without offering them a clear European perspective. And we can discuss about Article 49 of the treaty, and we can discuss, is it really fair to treat in a certain way some partners from the Eastern Partnership, for example, speaking about countries that are coming from the former Soviet Union space, which made them, their life much more complicated comparing to, for instance, the life of the Central European countries, also former communist. Not to mention the fact that at least some of them, I can mention the Republic of Moldova, I can mention Georgia, I can mention Ukraine, they have Russian troops occupying parts of the sovereign territory of this country. And not to mention that there are also some other dimensions of the conflict, speaking about Armenia and Azerbaijan. So we propose this new philosophy today. Let's hear more them. Let's invite them, our partners, to speak more today and to offer us the possibility to listen more their perspective, their expectations, and of course to put questions in the end and to make comments. This is why we have invited today a Moldovan, a Georgian. We have invited, of course, also an Ukrainian, but our colleagues from Kiev discovered only 4 days ago that they will have presidential elections that happened 2 days ago, so it was cancelled. Instead, we propose you a small surprise, and we have invited for clear reasons, also on Armenian, and we will discuss a little bit later. Of course, we invited a colleague from Bulgarian. I have mentioned also the former Bulgarian presidency, so to have also a European perspective among these aspirant or partner countries. Last but not least, we have invited an American among the Europeans, and I think it's a moment where we should speak among ourselves about what we continue to consider a must, a strategic partnership between Europe and America. We think that this is the moment to discuss. It's not the best period in the relationship between Europe and the United States, but in the same time, we think that there is a need to refresh a little bit our individual or our common European memory, also to refresh the memory of our American friends and allies, because we should not forget also the past, also the history, what happened after the Second World War, how it happened in that part of Western Europe, the free world that remained on the other side of the Berlin Wall, and how important was this relationship with the United States, because for us that remained on the other side of the Berlin Wall in the Central Eastern Europe, the life was much complicated for us. So I think when discussing about the future of the European Union, we should reflect on the possibility to better choosing or keeping our strategic partners, because inter alia the generations in Europe changed. There are new generations, also new politicians, but it's fair to say that the democratic foundation, the values and principles, the democratic principles are common and extremely solid between Europe and the United States. And no matter might be the perceptions and the current context, speaking about governments, prime ministers, presidents, chancellors, governments and presidents come and go, but the countries and Europe remain. And I think this solid European democratic and the transatlantic foundation, it's extremely important for everybody. In any case, first of all, for us, for the Central Eastern European countries, our memory still remain fresh. The wounds are not entirely closed, and this is why we feel the need to discuss in this moment, and this is why we invited also an American, a congressman, and of course I will make the introduction a little bit later. Just mentioning, before starting our debate, that we have invited Mr. Iurie Leancă, Deputy Prime Minister of the Republic of Moldova. We have invited also Tamara Kulordava, Chair of the European Affairs European Integration Committee of Georgia. We have invited Peter Sessions, Congressman, Republican, Texas, from the United States. We have invited Cristian Vigenin, former Foreign Affairs Minister, currently the Chair of the European Affairs Committee of the Bulgarian Parliament. And we have invited, and this is the surprise, Deputy Arman Yegoyan, who is the chair of the Standing Committee for European integration of the Armenian Parliament. So that's it. I will ask the indulgence of the keynote speakers and the intervener to try to respect the maximum 10 minutes for the beginning, to have time to give answers at the questions that I'm sure will follow. Now, we are going to start, and I will invite Mr. Iurie Leancă. As I mentioned, he is currently Deputy Prime Minister of the Republic of Moldova, guilty in charge for negotiating and signing at that time the association agreement with the European Union of the Republic of Moldova. He's a former Prime Minister, he's a former Foreign Minister, so he has a lot of things to say to our gathering. Mr. Lanka, Yurie, please take the floor.
Bună dimineața.
Good morning.
By expressing my gratitude to the Romanian presidency for this excellent initiative to hold this conference and to discuss many topics of extreme relevance for our continent, but also for choosing to focus on the current status and especially on the future of the Eastern Partnership, on the future of the countries which lie east from Romania, and especially on the future of the relationship between the countries from the Eastern Partnership and the European Union. I'll try to be briefer than 10 minutes, and I'll have to be a bit critical of the current relationship and especially of lack of a strategy on how to build the relationship between us and you, us, the countries from the Eastern Partnership, and you being European Union. But first, of course, let's discuss a bit about the 10 years since the Eastern Partnership was launched, because we cannot neglect this dimension in our relationship. And of course, I want to thank the fathers of this initiative, those who, the Swedish and the Polish foreign ministers who launched 10 years ago this initiative, and for being able to put few deliverables of great magnitude. Those deliverables which help to change certain realities in our countries, help to encourage the pro-European forces, and help to encourage the reformist forces, and change the lives of thousands of our citizens. If we all remember, of course, that the free visa regime, the association agreement, and the free trade were among the objectives of the Eastern Partnership, which was launched 10 years ago. And in April, later this month, we will celebrate 5 years since the visa-free regime entered into force between us and the European Union. And I'm very proud that almost 1.5 million Moldovan citizens were able to travel and to enjoy the rights of free movement in Europe. And I'm also very proud that the record of those Moldovan citizens proved to be an excellent one, and the return rate is a very small one. So again, we proved that we can behave as European citizens. And if you look at the free trade area, and we will celebrate it just in a few months, also 5 years, the impact it had on our economy, on our trade with the European Union is great. To give you just one figure, in 2014, when the agreement entered into force, around 50% of our trade was going towards the European Union. Today it's 70%. So in less than 5 years, there is an increase by 20% in our trade with the European Union, especially on the export side, which makes our economy much safer, much more predictable, because we still can, we will not forget that only a few days after I signed the association agreement and the free trade area, Moscow introduced sanctions on our products, embargo on wine, on grapes, on cherries, on apples, hitting us very strongly. Therefore, again, this free trade area had a double impact to develop our small and medium enterprises, to find our niche on a predictable market, on a safe market. And of course, we will celebrate 5 years from the signing of the association agreement. And here the impact is more mixed. There are good examples of the successful implementation of the association agreement, but also weaknesses in our system, if I speak about Moldova. What happened after we achieved those goals? In 2017, at the next summit of the Eastern Partnership, the countries from the EU and from our region achieved the so-called 20 deliverables. And we all say that those 20 deliverables are an important milestone milestone in our relations. They are marking our relationship, and their implementation should be a strong impetus for the reforms at home, but also for consolidating the relationship between us and the European Union. But let me be very frank. When I try to recall at least one of those 20 deliverables and to compare them to the magnitude, to the scope, and to the effect of those 3 goals I mentioned already, the visa-free regime and the association agreement and the free trade, of course I have problems. Again, let me be very honest, I can't recall right now one of those 20 deliverables because they are not important, because they're not really changing the realities on the ground. Probably the most important was one about the roaming tariffs, elimination of the roaming tariffs. But if you read how it is phrased, it's not about eliminating the tariffs between us and you, but it's about preparing to eliminate the tariffs, the roaming tariffs between us and Ukraine, us and Georgia, and the other countries from the Eastern Partnership, which is also very important. But that's not the key objective, because again, more Moldovans travel westwards. The same it's about Ukrainians, it's the same it's about Georgians. And where are we almost 2 years after these deliverables were agreed? Are we advanced? Even from this point of view, we are still on the level of, if I understand correctly, of pre-feasibility study. So why I'm mentioning that there is no good comparison between these 20 deliverables and the first 3 which we had to fulfill in 2014, because when there is no motivation, when there is no scope, we lose the enthusiasm for reforms. We cannot show to our citizens what is the future. Why shall we, as Titus mentioned, undertake this very costly, this very difficult, painful reforms, but what is the light at the end of this tunnel? So we have the stick, but we don't have the carrot, to put it this very American way. Therefore, of course, I think the most important task for us right now is to think, to reflect what shall be the future of the relationship between the countries of Eastern Partnership and the European Union. In my way, in my view, there are 3 key objectives of this relationship. First, to help us, the countries from the region, to put more emphasis, to do what one could call good governance, which means rule of law, which means institutions, accountable institutions, which means fighting against corruption, which means building a political system which is based on the same values and rules. Of course, the second objective of our relationship, I think, are to help us to find a way to develop our economy which would allow us at least to diminish the differences on GDP per capita, for example, which exist between us and Romania, between us and the other countries of the of the European Union, because right now the differences are just growing. And the third objective is to develop through this partnership an excellent relationship between the countries from the region, between us and Georgia and Ukraine and the other countries of the and Armenia, of course, because it's in our self-interest through this relationship to build a safe, prosperous, and predictable region. Let's try now to answer the question if we can reach those objectives without offering the countries of the region, Moldova, Georgia, and Ukraine at least, countries which want to have a different nature of relationship. So if we can achieve those objectives without offering us a clear European perspective. So, Titus, it's not just about being fair or not being fair. It's about whether we will be able to achieve those objectives of countries with, again, open political system, with a good economic model which would keep our citizens at home, and also with a growing solidarity and better and better relationship between the countries from the region. My response to it, we will never succeed. We will not achieve it, because again, if we look at at Moldova's development, the biggest enthusiasm for reform was in the period between 2009 and 2014, when we had to reach those objectives, which I mentioned already, because the perception was that these reforms will help us to get closer to the European Union, to open this perspective, and to become, at some point, a candidate country. My question was always to our European friends, why in the case of Romania, of Baltic countries, of other Central European countries, the European integration and Euro-Atlantic integration was the strongest motivation for the elites to conduct the reforms? Why should it not be appropriate for from the same perspective to look at the things from Moldova and Georgia and Ukraine? Look again where Moldova is or where Ukraine is. We are at the level of uncertainty, confusion, lack of clear perspective what to do at home after our parliamentary elections at the end of February and just 2 days after the elections in Ukraine. My deep conviction is that, and I don't want to put all the responsibility on the shoulders of the European Union, but my deep conviction is that without a strong push, pressure from the European Union, but also offering a perspective, we will not be able quickly to reform our justice, and without reforming our justice, we will never have the trust of our citizens and of our partners. My deep conviction is that without rethinking the economic financial instruments, we will not be able to at least diminish again, as I mentioned, the differences on the GDP per capita between us and Romania, our closest neighbor and more than just a simple neighbor. Right now it's what?
More.
I think 5 times bigger, the GDP per capita in Romania than in Moldova. And let me give you just one example. Farmers, subsidies. I looked at the figure last year. Romania got 4 billion euro as subsidies for its farmers. Moldova was, and it's mostly from the EU budget. Moldova was able to give our farmers from our own budget only 50 million euro. So how will be ever competitive with the Romanian farmers, not to mention German or French farmers who get even more subsidies on hectare and things like this. So we need new financial instruments, but it would especially be good if we would apply the pre-accession logics. And the same is about how to build a stronger relationship between us and the countries from the region. My last, again, thank you very much, Titus and Madam Crețu, for launching this initiative. But because I am at home in Bucharest, as a Romanian citizen as well, and because, by the way, you know that Moldova is in a very unique situation. We might be a country without any European perspective, although we have already probably around 1 million EU citizens at home. So just think about this paradox. I regret Romanian presidency did not envisage a mini-summit in Iași somewhere to dedicate this summit not in Brussels, but to talk about the future of our relations here in the region. I'm sure it would give more impetus to our relations. It would heighten the role of Romania in shaping the policies of the EU on the region. But again, it's a small regret. Maybe in the future we can work on it. Thank you very much.
Very nice.
Thank you very much,
Very nice.
Yuria. Before continuing, just one brief comment. It's among us, the EU member states. If someone believes that we can, and we will do it step by step, manage the challenges coming from the south, speaking about conflicts, refugees, migration, and so on. It will take time, but we can do it. If someone believes that after that, managing the enlargement process with the Balkans, it will take some time, but we will advance. I'm sure this is the only solution for the Balkans. Without securing or without offering a European perspective, not for tomorrow, not for the day after tomorrow, but to offer something concrete that will stimulate our partners from Eastern Partnership to deliver, to be engaged, to continue to make the reforms, it's not possible, it's not feasible. So just to let you know that we succeeded to secure the eastern border of European Union. I'm speaking now about Romania. According to all Frontex reports, we don't have a problem with the illegal migration on our border. Also because we have the cooperation of our partners, in this case it's Moldova and Ukraine. So the question is how to maintain partners engaged, really engaged and committed to the European process. And this is a very serious question because challenges are huge and Russia is extremely active from this point of view. Now, I would like to invite, and it's my pleasure to invite Tamara Kulordova. She is the chairperson of the Committee on European Integration of the Parliament of Georgia, and inter alia is also the co-chair of the EU-Georgia Parliamentary Association Committee. So, Tamara, it's my pleasure to invite you to take the floor.
Thank you very much.
You can take the microphone.
Okay. Thank you. It is, of course, a great pleasure to be able to address this audience and to participate in the conference. And for this, I have to start also by thanking Romanian presidency and specifically Madame Crețu for the conference and for also putting the issue of neighborhood and Eastern Partnership on the agenda of this very important conference. Whole day yesterday, this room full of people were deliberating on the future of the EU, and this is continued also today. A lot of issues were raised and questions were asked on, how to maintain competitiveness of the EU as a global actor. We were talking about various things, such as, need to adapt to the challenges, internal challenges of the EU, and also need to not stay too inward focused and still be able to adapt to the changes around the EU. Let me add one other thing to these questions and issues that were raised, which is, what exactly is the best thing about the EU? Why is EU so great? Is it its economic prosperity, and is it the ability to maintain peace on the continent? Is it solidarity and cohesion policy? What is it? Or is it everything together? But first and foremost, actually, if you allow my opinion here, first and foremost, its strength, its greatest strength, comes from its ability to lead the way and to inspire and to stay attractive. And that's how it has been for many years, and that's how it is also now. I understand that these sentiments can be a little bit more difficult right now to understand from being in the EU, but there is a lot of EU enthusiasm around the EU. I think there is a lot more EU enthusiasm outside EU right now than we see inside the European Union. And for one thing, if we are talking about anything to learn and anything to import from outside the EU, inside, what we need is exactly this, optimism and this belief in the better future. Because without this, you lose the main focus, and that is what is very important. And I don't think that you have luxury to abandon this idea, this great idea, and the project, which has started as a very important project and has delivered. And it has brought prosperity and peace to the countries that are now in the EU, but once aspired to become members. But this reality is still there. You still have countries east of EU that aspire to become members of the EU, not only on the east, but I'm representing the Eastern neighborhood and the Eastern Partnership, and that's why my focus is more on the eastern side. What has changed? Georgia has become, EU still looks at us as neighbors. Neighborhood policy was put in place without actually thinking about any prospect for these countries ever becoming members. Then we had 10 years ago Eastern Partnership, which also didn't really consider any membership as a feasible option for the countries that were put in the basket of Eastern Partnership. But as my colleague already mentioned, Eastern Partnership has delivered. It has delivered political association, economic integration that we have through association agreement and deep and comprehensive free trade area. and increased mobility, of course. And all that is very much appreciated, and that is very much valued. But of course, the question after 10 years is the valid one and is legitimate one. What is next, and how do we continue from now on? And what are the big objectives that we can have ahead of us, not immediately, not necessarily tomorrow or the day after, but what are those things that, or what is that great objective that we can have in mind when going through quite a difficult transformation? EU has had a very important transformative power, and that is very obvious looking at the countries such as Georgia, which has made a lot of progress in the last years, alike other countries, but let me focus on Georgia since that is the country that I represent. We have become from a mere neighbor and associated partner, as I said. There is an increasing dynamism in EU-Georgia bilateral relations. EU is recognized as a country that is doing best or doing well in the context of the Eastern Partnership. We have launched a high-level format between Georgia and EU, which is first of a kind because it is the direct format of where the Georgian government sits with the College of Commissioners, and that is quite a unique format that has become available for Georgia only as of last year. Our economy is growing, not as fast as we would all love to see it, but it is growing. Unfortunately, my figures on trade are not as optimistic as those presented by Moldova, and there are objective reasons for that, because we do not have the land border with EU. We do have a maritime border, and there Romania has a very special importance to us, the same as Bulgaria, because that is our access to the EU. Of course, the lack of geographic or I should say land border is another challenge that adds to the lot of issues and lot of challenges that my country is facing in its declared objective of wanting to join the European family of nations and wanting to become, at one point, member of the EU. Unfortunately, still in the minds of European politicians, I think the mental border of Europe lies at the Black Sea, and I think, but this is still a very, this is not a scientific issue, this is rather an issue of perspective, and I think when it comes to perspective, it can be changed. So Georgia is a European country. The European choice of Georgia is not an issue of a political choice. It's not a choice of one political group in Georgia, it's the people's choice. I talked about Euro-optimism, and I based that on the fact that based on all surveys that were carried out in Georgia, but let me particularly focus on the most recent one, which demonstrated that over 80% of Georgian population would want Georgia to join the European Union and is willing to take reforms and a long and complex path to make ourselves members of the EU. It is so much embedded in our DNA, if you want, that we have even put this in the Constitution, which is it is no longer a choice. It was mentioned here, and let me go back to this idea of governments coming and going. So this is not an issue which is dependent on this government or that government. This is a real choice and the issue that is common for everybody in the country, which unites all the mainstream political parties also. We have put it in the Constitution now that it's a constitutional obligation of everybody, every constitutional body, to do everything in their legal capacity to support Georgia's European integration. All this, as I said, among the among the issues, among the benchmarks or the achievements, I should say, that EU has become our top trade partner, which doesn't account for 70% of our external trade, but it still accounts for 1/3 of Georgia's external trade, which is a big achievement given this geographic issue which I mentioned. And all these developments occur on the background of persistent problem that Georgia is facing, which is the Russian occupation, of course, of Georgia's territories. And I cannot afford to speak at this conference without actually referring to this issue. Security and peace in the immediate eastern neighborhood of EU is not an issue of external importance. It's not an issue of no importance. It is actually an issue of very high importance. Peace and stability in our part of the world is directly linked to peace and stability and prosperity of the entire European continent. And therefore, it is very important, no matter how big of a problems EU is facing internally, for it is very important to keep the focus on the challenges that are around EU and to timely address those challenges. What kind of EU do we want to have was asked a question by Gisèle Jourda, I think, our colleague from France. And I ask you, what kind of Europe do we want to have? I think we want to have Europe that continues to inspire. I think we want to have Europe that continues to lead the way. And I think we want to have Europe that is able to address challenges. And not only for its own sake, and actually first and foremost for its own sake, but also we want Europe that is ready to make, if you want, unconventional decisions. We were talking about bold decisions yesterday, about something which needs to change and something which needs to go beyond the current inertia. And I think that is very, very important. And no matter how difficult it might seem right now to think about the future in the context of enlargement, and I understand that when you think about Eastern Partnership, you think about more problems than of benefits for the EU, but there is a way to reverse this kind of thinking by taking advantage with the potential that the Eastern Partnership countries have, and with your ability to stay as a power that attracts. And I think that is the most important thing to believe in, which will inspire you for better challenges, for better ability to address the current internal challenges that the EU is facing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tamar. Good comments, and one important question: what sort of European Union we want if we really want to have a global actor in relationship with our quality of European Union. Now, I will invite now our American friend. I'm speaking about Pete Sessions. He's congressman. He served his country and also North Texas in the Congress for 22 years. He served also as chairman of the powerful House Committee on Rules for 6 years, quite powerful committee within the U.S. Congress. And this is also an important point in his career. He was elected in 2008 and after that in 2010 by the House Republican Conference as chairman of the National Republican Congressional Committee, which is an important job in the U.S. establishment. Thank you very much, Pete, for coming from the other side of the Atlantic. And please present us what is your perspective, the American perspective, on the EU-America relationship and ties, which we consider, at least in our part of Europe, extremely, extremely important. Please.
Senator, thank you very much, and what a delight it is for me to be with each and every one of you. And for those of you who I've had an opportunity to share a sound word and confidence in, I want to thank you. The United States of America views Europe, the EU, and each of your countries in a very favorable and positive way. And America looks at the EU as an organization that is strong and that is good. We sometimes question some of the things that we see, the wisdom of how you deal with events, but I'm sure you look at us the same way. There are many events that are placed upon you that are difficult to deal with. I want to place myself exactly in the same confidence that I have heard this morning from two of my speaker colleagues, and to tell you that the United States of America tends to look at this in a rather academic perspective. We look at this as an academic perspective whereby we recognize that there are essentially several different systems in play. We have the American system or the American model. We're well aware of the Russian model. You, as many of you former subjects of that Russian empire, find yourself as new countries who are beginning your opportunity, and I do nothing but applaud you for the progress that you have made. You recognize, and I do too, that the Russian system would treat you as peasants. The American system wants to treat you with respect and an opportunity for you to grow. We look at sovereignty and independence as very important attributes. I'm going to say in the few minutes that I have today a number of individual words which I think come into direct line with what you have heard this morning, because my observations about where you need to go is exactly what you have just heard. The most important thing I would say to you today is that I think each of you need to make friends with success. That I believe that it would be true to say that I'm not sure that you have a simplistic goal in mind, a plan, a goal with an outcome that you have effectively communicated. That is difficult for elected people to do. We are looking at this time Mr. Modi, the Prime Minister of India, who established a very high bar in his perspective for his country. That was employment, the number of jobs that would be gained. You're held accountable for those things. And so I recognize that setting goals and objectives is hard. But what I would say is that I'd like to see this body and individual countries do what we call in the United States, skate to where the puck is going to be. And that is that you would establish your own goals, that you would establish your priorities, and that you would skate to where you want that success or that puck to be. The United States of America recognizes that we have, as the global power, a responsibility to protect you, to give stability from a perspective of what might be Russian influence or oligarchy influence upon you that might be thrust over your country. A prime example, what we did is when we helped with the natural gas issue several years ago. But what I want to say is that you are strong and that you have different ways to look at models. I think each of you should have a Bulgarian dream just as we have an American dream. I believe that you should have a Georgia dream just as we have an American dream or a Romanian dream. And I believe that you should talk about that in the best interest, and that America should know what your dream and your interests are. It is the same thing as a strategic business plan. It is a plan that America can then work with you off the goals that you have. And that is difficult. It is difficult. It was difficult you heard that I ran the National Republican Congressional Committee. We were in the minority. My party was in the minority back when President Obama and Mrs. Pelosi and Mr. Reid were in charge. And we actually, rather than complaining, went about a direct way to write a plan, communicate that to people, and achieve the things that we needed. This is the sort of thing I'm speaking of. I believe that you have the ability in here to say what you might have heard as a lack of strategy to turn into a strategy. I believe that you have heard today we have a weakness of our system. Perhaps the governance within the EU is more important than any one individual state. I think you should work on that. I don't think that your governance should say it's more important to take in people who have never been a part of the EU and make them more important than you are in the EU. I think that you've got to look at a strategic and tactical plan with deliverables. You heard my colleagues say that directly here. I think you should go back. I'm looking at the leaders of your country right now. I'm looking at the articulation of a dream that you can achieve. And the United States would look at this as a goal. We would like to work with you. We would like to know what that is, and we would like to achieve it. Years ago, I had a belief that the EU was all about all for one and one for all. I believe that's changed a bit. I believe that's changed a bit, but you still, I think, are stronger as a unit than you are individually. And you simply need to reprioritize this communication, strategic plan to make sure you and the EU, you and the United States know what your goals are going to be. The United States is concerned about governance. They are concerned about rule of law. We are very concerned about the systems by which we're a part of. And as you and I know, there's some conflict between the EU system that might be in place of banking and regulatory matters and an American system, but we are far better than the systems of corruption that we see our main competitors be. Next, I would like for you to recognize that the United States is also involved, as you are, in global competition. We are involved in global competition and trying to fight a larger battle. That larger battle is finding itself right now in what might be called a trade war between the United States and China. But if you pay attention, you will soon see that take out Donald Trump and put system in place. What is occurring quickly is that China is adapting themselves, openly communist country that is going directly to market-based economies. They have some 600 billionaires in their country. And we would have many more billionaires if we did not have a taxing system that we call the IRS. But what is happening on the high side is that this battle that the United States is doing over tariffs will directly empower the Chinese marketplace and their consumers. Because what has happened is that China has taken through the tariffs that they hold out of American products, and they have built a nation that is very impressive. But what will happen is now, instead of making the money off the consumer buying the American product, those tariffs will go away and those Chinese consumers will be able to have market-based products at the market rate instead of paying a tariff. So it has caused China to now adapt a policy where they're going to have an internal revenue service. They're going to have a taxing system which they have never had. And whether you like that or not, because I don't always like our IRS, it is putting the world on a different playing field where someone cannot own the world anymore, but rather the consumer will be the winner in the marketplace. And that is the battle that the United States is fighting on behalf of, I think, the free world, to make sure that there is not something that is owned entirely by one country. And that is, as it was going, the Chinese would own the world, and they would take from you to add to that. So I think that if you'll just put into context what you have heard today, you will find the favor of the relationship, of the favor of respect from the United States, that we actually respect where you have come from, where you are going to, and if you communicate these needs, not just to the American chambers and to our embassies, but actually to business in America, we will correspond, we will come get investment, we will see stability, and we will work in your best interest because we would like to see you succeed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pete, for your extremely interesting comments. I agree that it might be problems, and there are some problems, and we can discuss on, for instance, data protection, on banking, on car industry, but also on tariffs that were imposed on the steel and the aluminum coming from EU and the response of the EU. But we can discuss and we can find appropriate solutions because we speak the same language. And this is the most important thing. We speak the same democratic language. And as a newcomer in the European Union family, we know that yourself, with some of the colleagues being present in the room, you obtained an important victory while fighting for freedom, for liberty, together. And we were the beneficiaries through quite late or later of this victory for freedom. And this is really important. I was looking on some economic assessments. It's true that EU-US economic ties account for approximately half of the global GDP and 1/3 of the world trade. So this remains the largest bilateral trade and investment relationship, not to mention some other political, strategic, or some other economic important topics. So thank you very much for the message. And now I will turn towards Cristian Vigenin. Cristian is someone that I know for many years. He's a former very good foreign minister of Bulgaria. We were colleagues in the Foreign Affairs Council when we have discussed it immediately after the illegal annexation of Crimea, and it was a serious discussion on both EU and NATO at the time. Currently, he is the chair of the Committee on European Affairs and Oversight of the European funds in the National Assembly of the Republic of Bulgaria, and he had an important role during the Bulgarian presidency. Cristian, please, you have the floor.
Thank you, Titus. First of all, I'd like to thank you personally and Gabriela Crețu for the opportunity that you're giving us to discuss important issues on the future of the EU and the future policies of the EU. And I think it's really important and interesting to hold this discussion in the presence of representatives of the Western Balkans, of the Eastern Partnership countries, because sometimes they remind us the value of the European Union. Being outside sometimes you see really, and you can appreciate the positive sides of the European Union. Being inside, being already part of it, sometimes you're sucked in the daily operation of the European Union. You start focusing on more on the deficiencies, and we forget to remind our citizens the value of being part of the European Union. And as Mr. Sessions mentioned, together we are stronger, and it's our responsibility, all of us who are participating here today, but all political representatives that are part of the big discussions now within the EU, to really focus also on the positive sides and how to strengthen the positive sides of the European Union. It is also important to have these discussions with our colleagues from Western Balkans and Eastern Neighborhood, because the future of EU and the debate on the future of EU concerns them very much as well. Because it very much depends, I mean, their perspective for their future relations with the EU depends very much on what kind of EU we will have. Because if we have a united, coherent union, that will make much easier their relations with the EU and, in perspective, their membership. But if we have a European Union on 2 speeds or more speeds with the core and periphery, that would mean that they may end up as being periphery to the periphery of the EU, which is, let's say, not a very good perspective. So I think all of us that want a coherent EU and the fight within the EU is also a fight for the future of our relations with our neighbors. We will have to take important decisions in the months to come. First of all, this is an important decision of every citizen of the EU in the upcoming European elections, because the next several months will define at least the next 5 years of the European policies, both with the new European Parliament, but also with the new composition of the European Commission. And why I make this link, because the discussions that are coming will affect very much, again, Eastern neighborhood and the Western Balkan countries. This European Commission didn't start very well with regard to enlargement, we know that. But the end, it's much more positive. Since last year, during the Bulgarian presidency and afterwards, we've made a lot of progress with regard to enlargement. And if this is maintained also in the next presidency, as Austrians did, as Romania is doing now, and we have the commitment of Croatia as well, I think we can achieve much better situation and much better perspective for the Western Balkans. I start with that first. But it's not enough to talk only about, I mean, the big political conclusions, big political statements. It's very important what decisions we make on practical level. And why I mention this, this is because the discussion on the next European budget, for example, is a discussion not only for the EU itself, but it's discussion also for our neighbors. If we see in the next multi-annual financial framework more financial support dedicated to Eastern neighborhood, for example, if we see more finances dedicated to enlargement, if we see more resources dedicated to transborder programs, for example, and more flexibility and links between cohesion funds and instruments for pre-accession, for example, that would mean that the EU is taking seriously its commitments towards the enlargement of the EU. If we don't see it, then it would be difficult to hide the absence of these practical steps with big political statements, because finally political statements should be seen in the steps that are taken, decisions that are made within the EU. And mentioning this, I would like to remind you that during the Bulgarian presidency, we have adopted a declaration. There was a summit on Western Balkans which reconfirmed the commitment of the European Union towards the Western Balkans, and the other way around, of course, commitment of the Western Balkans to hold the necessary reforms. But at the same time, there was, as an annex to this political declaration, we have adopted also a so-called Sofia priority agenda, where we have agreed, I mean, EU has agreed on some concrete steps which would improve the connectivity of the region, which would improve the links between countries themselves and the EU and the region. And we as Parliament, the Bulgarian Parliament, is holding our government accountable what is being achieved on these priorities, this Sofia priority agenda. So far, I would like to mention that after the summit, we've seen some decisions of the European Commission and of the European Union which confirm that this political declaration is being implemented step by step. It can't be done immediately, but for example, we've got 190 million euro in support of development of the railroad systems in the Western Balkans for 11 projects. We've got another 30 million euro to support developing infrastructure on broadband internet in the region, I mean, to improve also the digital connectivity of the region. Additional money for around 400 kilometers railroads have been dedicated also to improve the connectivity within the countries in the region. So which means that if we are serious, if we focus on concrete steps, concrete achievements, we can show also to our citizens that we are serious, and to the citizens of the Western Balkans. Just a few words on the Eastern neighborhood and Eastern partnership. I would say that that was now taking stock on the 10 years of existence of this policy. Maybe we have started this policy with more enthusiasm, with the ambition to achieve more very quickly. But it seems to me that with the time, the policy has adapted to the realities. It became more flexible and more focused on concrete achievements. And I think that there should be no disappointment that the countries, especially those that want to be much closer to the European Union, do not get at this moment the promise for future membership. But if all the opportunities the Eastern Partnership is giving are taken seriously and are fully implemented, that will make those countries, especially countries like Moldova, Georgia, and Ukraine, so close to the EU, so aligned with the policies, with the legislation, with the economy of the EU, that the big step to become member of the EU will be taken so easy that I'm sure that sooner or later, rather sooner, this perspective will be given, and these countries will have the opportunity to join us in the EU. So these concrete steps, for example, the 20 deliverables for 2020, and that will be, let's say, evaluated in the next summit of the Eastern Partnership, will show that this concrete approach is giving results, and that the citizens of these countries will see the benefits of being closer, ever closer and closer to the EU. And it's a two-side project. We should prepare on our side, and of course the countries should prepare on their side. If we see, and I finish by saying that the European Commission last year have indicated that 2 countries of the Western Balkans would be able to join in 2025. If we see that this promise or this indication can be achieved, can be kept, that would be, from my side, a big encouragement for all countries. And very soon, when the EU finds its new role in the world, when the EU finds its new priorities inside, it will be much easier for EU also to take the big steps towards the Western Balkans and also to the Eastern Partnership countries. I'm rather optimistic, and let's do it together. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christian. I will take your comments on Eastern Partnership and the positive, let's say, attitude towards the perspective, and also on the Balkans, the Western Balkans, but I will add an important discussion on Turkey, because we didn't mention yet Turkey. But for that, for the at least two members to become members, 2 states to become members of the European Union in 2025, first, in June, based on the discussion that we had previously, we should take a decision concerning new candidates and opening new chapters for some others. So to assure the continuation of the process, which is fundamental for, historically speaking, extremely troubled area of Europe, that means Balkans. Now, the surprise that I have mentioned you in the beginning of the panel, we have invited Mr. Arman Yegoyan, his deputy, and his chair of the Standing Committee on European Integration as intervener in our panel. I think it will be extremely important to listen our Armenian colleague after the Velvet Revolution in May 2018 that generated so strong emotion all around the world, also in Europe, after the elections that took place in December 2018, and also after the signature of the Comprehensive and Enhanced Partnership Agreement with the European Union that, by the way, my country, Romania, ratified in December last year. So we see a refreshed spirit and interest towards stronger ties with the European Union. And we see an important battle for more democracy and liberty, and this is something that we welcome. So, Arman, please, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. As you mentioned, I'm coming from a country that underwent major political changes last year. So peaceful, non-violent, democratic protests resulted in what we know now as Armenian Velvet Revolution. So these major change affected Armenian internal politics and, in a way, also its foreign policies, especially with regard to the EU, and I will explain why. If before, the major paradigm between Armenia and the EU was constructed on the concept of more for more, that if before, after each elections, EU observers, OSCE observers were complaining, were making notices and remarks about shortcomings, about misfunctioning of electoral system. This time, the very latter elections that you mentioned were, as the ambassador of the EU to Armenia, as it said, the best ever elections in the history of independent Armenia. It was a quotation. So because of this fact, because of the major change in Armenian internal politics, because of the fact that now in power is the force, a political force that is completely dependent upon the will of people, that has zero dependency from any of financial sources inside the country, from oligarchy, as we sometimes call them, from any kind of influences. Because of this, as I said, the foreign policy in a way was changed. So now we are on our way to build a new type of relationship with the EU, where we do not do more for more, but we do the most possible for ourselves, for our people, not for some incentives or because of some incentives or some pies from cakes, but because we follow, as Mr. Session mentioned, our dream. Now we have an Armenian dream, as you mentioned, and everybody knows about that dream. And what we need from the EU on our way of implementing of our reforms are, I will be very honest here, two things. First of all, an expertise, because many of the EU countries underwent these changes decades ago or recently and had accumulated a certain amount of expertise which we can use and which we will readily use during the implementation of our reforms. We were talking about SEPA agreement between the Armenia and the EU. Yes, in November 2017, that agreement was signed, and it is so far ratified by 10 EU member states. And I also want to convey this message to all the other 18 member states, to the parliamentarians, to boost and to ratify this agreement as soon as possible. But I want to say also that about 80% of the norms of the agreement are already in force from June 1st last year, and just recently we have completed the roadmap for the implementation of these agreement with the EU, and very soon we will already start its implementation step by step in all the domains of the of where it suggests to do major reforms. Secondly, what we expect from the EU, maybe indirectly, but it is direct investments in Armenian economy. Not loans, not only loans, not even only blended loans, that is loans and grants, but also direct investments to Armenian economy, because our economy now is free from monopolies, and all the equal opportunities are created for all the players in the market. And the very last remark about the 20 deliverables. So it was mentioned, those deliverables were mentioned twice, their efficiency and the rest. But if we go through these deliverables, we can say that about half of these deliverables were addressed as a natural outcome of a revolution. For example, the corruption, strengthening the rule of law and anti-corruption mechanisms. I can now say that systemic corruption, I repeat, systemic corruption is completely eliminated from the public administration system, starting from the very top and going all the way down. And all the instances of individual expression of this crime are punished by all force of law. All, or we can say, let's say about freedom of media and communication, independence of media. The same here. All media outlets in Armenia now are completely free. They are free to write whatever they want, free to give stage to whichever politician they choose to, and no any administrative or financial resources are forced against them. So these were my concluding and intervening remarks, and I also hope that in light of what I've said, we can indeed create and enlarge even more the Armenian EU agenda. And thank you all, and I'm ready to respond to your questions.
Thank you very much, Arman. I think, just a brief reaction, I think everybody is aware in this room about the complexity of the geopolitical situation in your region. We understand this. But I think it's important that this refreshed battle for democracy and freedom and reforms, and also looking to EU in a refreshed way, I think is something that we welcome. Adding in the same time, nevertheless, that predictability in foreign policy, it's extremely important. So I wish you a good continuation in this process of reforms. And I was, just before starting the session of questions and answers, I was very close to say that this was the most disciplined panel with, of course, substantial contributions of the keynote speakers, respecting the time allocated. But now we have to change, I have to change a little bit the conclusion, because our American friend want to break a little bit my conclusion and to have just a short, a brief intervention, adding something that I think he considers important. So, Pete, you have the floor.
Senator, thank you. There's a discussion, some discussion about what America gets involved in. And today I tried to speak on a high level because that's what this discussion's about. But over the last 5 years, I have personally spent my time involved as chairman of the House Rules Committee, involved in 2 very specific examples, and it dawned on me when there was a talk about your infrastructure. Remember, the old Russian system had gauge of railroads that is different than the West has. And as you go about, even in your hard infrastructure changes, please remember we'd like for you to be on the side of us as you do that. Secondly, I got engaged in a very difficult issue of NATO troop movement where they came to a border and respected another country, but the border guards that were there stopped NATO troop movement in an exercise that was necessary and understood. A lot of these things are infrastructure things that I think the EU and all the nations need to be aware of. The United States is really trying to help, but needs your help also. Thank you, Senator.
Good point. Thank you very much, Pete. Now I count on the generosity of Minister Chamba, the Minister for European Affairs, and the generosity of our chair of the conference to allow us at least for 15 minutes, starting from now, to address questions and to give quick and substantial answers, if possible. I would like the organizers to put, and okay, you have put it on the screen, the names of colleagues that want to address questions. First of all, Gisèle Jourda de la France.
Good morning. Since the Eastern Partnership was designed, it referred to Eastern countries sharing the same values. Those countries were committed to a higher level of economic and political integration. The first idea was that of economic and democratic progress eastwards. The Eastern Partnership has always been an act of faith in the future of Europe that is completely unified and prosperous. The objective was ambitious and daring even. So EU offers cooperation to 6 neighbors, and this offer is part of our wish to see Europe united around the ideal of democracy and free spirit of enterprise. EU exerts an influence in light of its model that is not mandatory but offers the possibility of choice. This policy of the Eastern Partnership is based on the voluntary approval, and EU is very flexible. A 4th agreement of association was signed with Armenia, which is also part of the Euro-Asian Partnership that created lots of debates in the European Commission, in the EU Commission. So far, there were progresses made by the countries that are different one from another, but the countries that have structural commonalities. There still are gaps. There are sometimes too close relationships with Russia, or there are on their territory frozen conflicts. So EU can feel proud of its efforts to promote democracy and the state of law. And I am confident that the Eastern Partnership should be maintained, developed, and it should stay a European priority, in line with the most recent changes. Thank you so much, Madame Jourda, for your comments.
In Romanian, my colleague Gabi Ionescu, member of the European Affairs Committee of the Senate, but I would like to encourage the colleagues when putting the question to put a brief question, if possible, to allow as many as possible colleagues to put questions. Domnule Ionescu, vă rog.
Thank you, my colleague. I will speak in my language, Romanian. Bună dimineața!
Good morning, everybody. I did appreciate the speakers, and I did appreciate what Mr. Vigenin said. He gave me the opportunity to have an introduction to what I'm going to say. The Eastern Partnership Summit that took place in 2017 in Brussels discussed 20 deliverables within a specific strategy. The EU made available to the member states and the neighboring states a platform called connectivity, and Mr. Vigenin made reference to that. Corridor 9, Pan-European Corridor 9, decided upon in Helsinki in 1994 and 1997 respectively, is an example of a project in the sense of reaching the targets of the Eastern Partnerships Agreement signed in Brussels. Currently, Romania is a good example as regards the reaching of some of the targets, some of the deliverables. Not only that, but for the Western Balkans also. Connectivity is the most efficient platform offered by the EU for the free circulation of persons, goods, capitals, and services. It is at the same time an efficient possibility to reach objectives both in the Eastern Partnership Agreement and for the states of the Western Balkans. The EU is now finalizing the negotiations for the 2021-2027 budget framework. It is important to update the targets of the Eastern Partnership. Romania is amongst the states most interested in that. Both the European Parliament and the European Commission will have to find new solutions, to find new answers for the following questions. How much can be allocated in the EU budget for 2021-27 for reaching the objectives of the connectivity platform, those objectives that are important for the Eastern Partnership and for the Western Balkans? What are the possibilities to access the funds in the connectivity platform? 3. Who are the beneficiaries and what are the expected results? 4. Which is the timeline for the integration of the aspiring countries, both in the Eastern Partnership and in the Western Balkans? I hope that answers will be given at least to these 4 questions that I raised here. I wish the conference every success.
I will call right now Ervin Bushati. He's from Albania, a colleague of us from the Parliamentary Assembly of the Council of Europe also. Ervin, you have the floor. He is in the room. If not, yes, please.
Thank you, Titus. Thank you, the organizers in Romania, for such a wonderful event. 95% of Albanians support the European Union of peace. Because Europe has unified in peace what will never be gained by war. Because there is no such thing as winning a war. It's a contradiction in terms. So, the Western Balkans are not, or are actually more than a de facto enclave. They are an integral part of Europe. So when we talk about Europe, we talk about inclusion. It's not just a club for peace and security or an economic club, but it's also about inclusion. And the Western European countries are de facto the same amount of population-wise as Romania. And We have seen the wonders of the European Union because we have seen the wonders of peace, an unprecedented period of peace, more than 70 years of peace because of NATO. And we are the same fervent supporters of NATO as well. And we just celebrated 10 years into NATO because we do believe in peace and prosperity. We've been on the receiving end of history in our soils. Most of the global wars have been fought, not because of Albanians, not because of the Greeks, but because of World War I, World War II. Civilizations have collided because it's an isthmus where everybody walks across Europe, as they've done in ages. And we're doing everything to be included, to be part of this inclusion, big inclusion. We've done our homework persistently in order to join the European Union, because our people believe, they do believe as in a northern star, that we should do every reform in order to join the European Union. Justice reform has been the crown, our crown jewel of reforms. We are the only country in the world who has it enshrined in the Constitution, an international overseeing body regarding the justice reform. Our economic data are good. We have a 4.3 GDP growth. We have a 1.9 deficit in GDP terms. And we, as Europeans, we are Europeans. So this is more than an enlargement. This is about inclusion. The Western Balkans are Europeans. They're an integral part of Europe. So it cannot be about enlargement, but it should be more about inclusion. Thank you again for this opportunity. And we can't wait to have more meetings where we can discuss about the future of Europe, our common future. So thank you to Romania, thank you, Titus, and have a good session.
Thank you very much, Erwin. I still have on my list 8 colleagues who wanted to address questions. I will ask Gabriela Crețu to refrain to put a question, to let the others, if possible, to address questions, if possible, brief. So now I will invite a dear colleague of us and of mine, Davor Ivo Stier. He is also a former Minister of Foreign Affairs of Croatia, a very good foreign minister, by the way. Ivo, please.
Thank you, Titus. And I think that Christian Vigenin pointed out rightly the connection between the fragmentation in the European Union and how it can badly affect both the Western Balkans, the enlargement process, and the neighborhood policy. But even if we avoid to have a two-speed or more-speed Europe, unfortunately, we are seeing some fragmentation in the European Union. Brexit is a point in case, and whatever the result of that, it will have an implication, an institutional introspection, and that will badly affect, in a way, also the enlargement process. So is it time for us to start thinking of a reform of the enlargement process, not to replace it, but rather to reinforce it more in a strategic way and to save it? Just a few weeks ago, the French Minister for Europe in Belgrade sent a very candid, but still, I would say, pessimistic view about the enlargement process. So instead of sending this kind of signals, shouldn't we think about something like what Bologna has done for higher education, to have a sort of intermediate degree before the full degree of your academics, so some kind of baccalaureate, something that is not replacing full membership, but actually giving an intermediate status that is more achievable for local governments and for the EU, to avoid any kind of strategic vacuum in the meantime to achieve the full membership, because when we have vacuums, you see non-EU actors coming into the region and having also a negative effect. So in order to save enlargement and the good cause of enlargement, shouldn't we start thinking with the new parliament and the new commission about an adjustment and a reform to reinforce the enlargement process? Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Ivo. I fully share personally your comments, and you have mentioned extremely important word, strategic. So we should be political in our assessment. Criteria are extremely important, but some things are really strategic. So we can discuss separately. I would like to invite Gayan Abramayan from Armenia.
Thank you very much, dear colleagues. First of all, I would like to appreciate and reaffirm our appreciation for all of your efforts for EU-Armenia cooperation. As my colleagues and my colleague from Georgia stressed the importance of security and peace, I would like to remind that 3 years ago, just exactly today, military escalation, which was tagged as a 4-day war in Nagorno-Karabakh, broke out. And this comes to show that peace and stability are and should be viewed as a high priority in the agenda of EU. What about democratic development? I should mention that different programs funded by the EU, especially those targeted to strengthening all of media and civil society in Armenia, had seriously supported to the creation of counterbalances to the previous corrupt government of our country. That has proven during Armenian non-violent Velvet Revolution. However, in my view, the fact of the revolution itself is and should be a signal for EU to think about revising its strategy, which needs to revisit the so-called personalized approach to each country. For example, implementation of specific method and approaches is highly indicative in case of Armenia. For example, the more and more cooperation format is not anymore relevant or is not as productive as we may thought. The conditionality approach demands for years for the previous non-legitimate government of Armenia have been implemented within months by the current democratically elected government. Here is support, embracement, and encouragement as a model based on democratic values can make Armenia as an example for other countries in the region, on the region, or beyond the region. The reason I'm stressing this is because the political change in Armenia was by and large a revolution of values. It was a struggle for fundamental human rights and democracy. It is also important to note that the current government agenda for reforms is in compliance with the values and economic agenda with the EU. So my question is there a discussions or a discourse of changing or viewing to change this strategy, long-term strategy in the EU? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I would like to call now Sasho Vasilevsky from the Republic of Northern Macedonia, please.
Thanks, Titus. Dear colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, let me congratulate you to your first Romanian presidency with the Council of European Union, which is, I hope, be successful both for Romania and my country, Republic of North Macedonia, if we get a date for start of negotiation with the EU. Looking ahead, our dream is to be part of the EU family with clear rules where everyone will respect the rules and the rule of law. To achieve this, countries should have strong institutions that will provide for independent judiciary and fight against corruption. My country, Republic of North Macedonia, as a candidate country for Euro membership, has a really hard and difficult agenda in 2018 and continues in 2019. These are historical years for the state. Republic of North Macedonia looked back and analyzes that the country is suffering from the unsettled name issue with the neighbor Greece, as well as the unsettled historical issues with Bulgaria, and decided to move forward. We worked hard and several months in adopting the constitutional changes in the Assembly as a commitment arising from the Prespa Agreement. We must admit that the two countries, my country, Republic of North Macedonia and Greece, have made Sisyphus efforts to successfully overcome this bilateral dispute And with the ratification of the agreement in the Greek parliament, this issue was fortunately successfully resolved. Brussels have assisted these steps positively, which resulted in the signing of the accession protocol to NATO in February this year. For us, this is certainly a great success. Our goal is to make visible progress in domestic reforms and EU member states to adopt a political decision on opening accession negotiation in June this year, 2019. In the end, I am sure that the European integration process in the interest of everyone in Europe, because if the Balkan countries are stable and prosperous, Europe is stable too. We believe in a common European future and are sure that we will not step back from the goal. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Sasha. I was discussing with our Moldovan colleague. It's interesting, not so many questions, but there is a need, a feeling for much more communicating to us from our partners. Thank you so much. I would like to invite now Cliff Soley from the United Kingdom, please.
Well, here is a question for you as well.
I was waiting for it.
It's on security, because second perhaps to prosperity and political stability, security for a population is profoundly important. As freedom from crime, serious crime, whether it's corruption, terrorism, or whatever. And you will know that a great deal of work has been done on improving security in the European Union, and the UK has played a major part in that. And whatever happens when the saga of Brexit finally plays itself out, and I do hope that finally it will play itself out one way or the other, but that security cooperation needs to continue. And it's everything from Europol to the arrest warrant, to the Schengen information system, to passenger name records, a whole range of things which concern the safety and security of the people of both of the United Kingdom, of the European Union, and of the accession states. And in many ways, it is particularly important for the Baltic region and those accession states which are still struggling with those problems, not least corruption, as you've heard. So my question to you is really, how can we continue to make that security process build up to give greater confidence to the people of the European Union and the accession countries and to the UK? We will have to be part of that in the UK because we played a major role in it. And I was on the committee where we produced a report on the security relationships within Europe. And we have another report here today for those of you who would like to collect it on how we manage some of these issues, including security, after the United Kingdom leaves the European Union. And that is, in my judgment, quite likely to happen, not absolutely certain about that, but quite likely to happen. So it is important that we face up to these tough issues. And the sooner we start talking about it, the better. I'm very grateful for that, and thank you very much. Anybody who wants a copy of the report, please come and see us.
Thank you very much for your comments. Definitely, UK will not leave nor NATO, nor Europe, nor the bilateral strategic partnership that you have with different European member states. But it's an important question, indeed. I would like to invite Frederick Lindmeier from Netherlands to make a question or to address a question, to make comments, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, and especially also Mrs. Cretu, once again from our delegation for your great initiative and wonderful organization. The last 24 hours or so, we talked a lot about the future of the EU in terms of economics, cooperation, cohesion, and inclusiveness. I want to underline a few more aspects. The future relationships with the world surrounding us, whether it are our direct neighbors, the East, Northern Africa, or the US, cannot be seen without an analysis of the developments there, as more of the very interesting keynote speakers expressed in different ways also today. And as Mrs. Kudadarova said, outside the EU is sometimes more enthusiasm than inside. Sometimes it needs a good neighbor to show you how nice your own house is. But the benefits and values of the EU are never secured forever. Our democratic system is a great good, but non-democratic and more autocratic powers are surrounding us and are very present on the world podium. Autocratic leadership exists inside and around the EU and is a threat of the international rule of law as we know it, and which is part of our European shared set of values. Democracy, human rights, peace and stability, solidarity, and the rule of law are even more fundamental than our collective working on prosperity. Those values are European-based, and they unite us. Of course, while developing these values, we do not stop inviting our neighbors in that respect every step we set in developing the West Balkan relationship, the Eastern Partnership, and the Euro-Atlantic relationship, how different each of them are, must find its basic on those common values. I was very much inspired by Mr. Yegoyan, who said, we are not only reforming because others want it, but because our people want it by themselves. That's a very good expression, I think. And I gladly invite the panel to elaborate more on that piece, the own will of the people to have reforms, also when the EU was not asking for it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your comments. Only one remark, speaking about good neighbors. You have mentioned good neighbors. Just to inform you that Crimea, which was illegally annexed by Russia, it's only 300 kilometers crossing the Black Sea from the Sulina harbor, which is the most advanced Romanian territory in the Black Sea. So I would like to call now Elvira Kovac, which I welcome her on both Serbian and Hungarian to take the floor.
Thank you, dear Titus, dear colleagues, keynote speakers. It is a pleasure to be here and to address you from the point of view of a candidate country, Serbia. On the other side, I must say this panel is about neighborhood Balkans, so we expected to have more focus, at least a little bit more focus on Western Balkans. We understand the position of Eastern Partnership, but we could have someone from the Western Balkans. I would like to say, and I believe firmly, that it is particularly important to maintain the economic welfare and political stability of the Union. We, from our side, underline that despite all of the challenges we were speaking these days facing the Union, the continuation of the enlargement process is extremely important. Recent messages in support of the EU enlargement policy of the Western Balkans are encouraging for all of us, for Serbia especially, but we hope that the European Union will continue being focused on the Western Balkans regardless of these challenges. We are aware of the fact that enlargement is not a popular topic during the campaign for the European elections, but we will wait 2 more months and see what will happen in the future. I'm particularly happy that Christian mentioned the date 2025. Last year it was a big topic for Montenegro and Serbia that it could happen when the strategy was launched at the beginning of the year, and then I had a feeling that almost everyone forgot about it. And I would say a big thank to both Bulgaria and Romania to having this, and Austria, of course, to having the topic on enlargement on the agenda, and hopefully everybody could understand that the EU can be united and full only with Western Balkans and other neighbors later in it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elvira. And I would like to call now Christos Kellas from Greece.
Mesdames et Messieurs, mes chers collègues, des aspects significatifs. Euro-Atlantique et l'Occident. Selon les interactions stratégiques au niveau du système
According to international,
devient un champ d'antagonisme géopolitique.
Given the
Et au-delà de
Within the contemporary framework, the political circumstances represent the usual ally of the European Union, represented by the United States. In the Middle East Partnership, we have different objectives regarding the countries in Balkans. In the Western Balkans, the objective is given by signing a declaration with the European Union in order to assure stability, internal stability, the consolidation of the rule of law, and within Bosnia and Herzegovina, we have structural problems regarding the interethnical nations, and in Albania, the rights of the Greek citizens are infringed, and the rights of property and of minorities are violated. And there are persecutions, especially after the association of the Greek Atsinas. If we want, indeed, to have a strong European Union in the world, then we have to consolidate the European law on the continent, and we have to take into consideration the national awareness, willing to acquire more valencies in order to survive. Because I represent Greece, part of the European nucleum, and we are somehow a new democracy, I believe that the task of the European forces is to include the commitment in the text of the declaration. We have to harmonize the national awareness with the European one, and we have to face thus the challenges of the 21st century in an equal and homogeneous way. Thank you for your attention. I would like to thank, on behalf of the French-speaking countries, for the contribution and for the magnificent way in which you speak French.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think that when we consider the modern and emerging Europe, one of the things we must keep in mind at all times is equality. Equality within the European Union itself, and equality towards those aspiring members, particularly those in that sensitive area in the Balkans. And from our history, we all know to avoid that issue is to make a very serious error. Similarly, an inner and an outer circle in Europe is not acceptable, because when greater influence and power is given to one or other region, obviously resentment will follow. And with resentment comes discontent and instability. The other thing we need to keep in mind, and I must remind the meeting, is a great Irishman and great European, Peter Sutherland, some years ago, went to enormous efforts to avoid a world trade war. Nobody wins in a trade war. The minions, the small fish, get squeezed in the beginning. Huge damage is done to the bigger players, and nobody can come out of that saying they won, because they can't. And the people are the ones who pay, ultimately, sadly so. I think that if we were to adopt a motto for the future, I think we have to be conscious of each other's efforts, those in the periphery and those in the centre and those aspiring, and try to meet the requirements, not the demands, but the requirements of both sides as we go along. Finally, I want to say this. We're saddened that the UK is leaving. Not to the benefit of the UK, despite what people think in the UK. It is not to the benefit of the European Union. And it is not to the benefit of global stability in general. That's all I say.
Thank you very much for your comments, sir. And now, the last comment or question, I will call Agata Borowiec from Poland to take the floor.
Thank you. Dear colleagues, in our opinion, European neighborhood policy, including the southern and eastern dimension, needs to be reflected in the new financial architecture. So we support maintaining ENI as a separate tool in the new MFF. The proposed solution to merge it into one broad financial instrument may be perceived by our neighbors, both Eastern and Southern, as a sign of losing interest in this dimension of the EU policy. We believe that a new political impetus is needed for the Eastern Partnership after 2020. For the most ambitious partners, the most attractive offer. Further sectoral integration should be developed. Well, we should also avoid keeping these countries in the waiting room for decades. Also, the ambitious neighborhood policy is essential for boosting Europe's overall security. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comments. I'm sure that your comments related to the budget and the future budget and Eastern Partnership Southern Dimension were taken on board by the Romanian European Affairs Minister, transferring to the Minister of Finance of Romania, the presidency. Now, Mission Impossible, dear colleagues, every and each of you will have 1 minute each to choose one item to give an answer, if possible. If you prolong, it's up to you, but I will call once again the indulgence of the chair of the conference. So please think to one item that you are interested to make a specific comment, and we are going to start with Mr. Lanka. Yuria, you have the floor.
Thank you, Titus. Well, there were not so many questions, there were more reflections and comments. And let me take the privilege to comment on what the Polish representative just mentioned. I fully share your view. Yes, we need to give a perspective. Yes, we need to have financial instruments. Yes, we need to encourage the countries from the eastern region especially. I still feel, I don't know what should be the right word when we speak about accession for Western Balkans and just neighborhood for Eastern countries. I still don't understand why we should have this different approach. It's hurting, it's discouraging, it's not motivating the pro-reformist forces. The Croatian former foreign minister mentioned about the strategic vacuum. Compare Western Balkans and Eastern neighborhood, where there is more strategic vacuum which is filled in by non-EU actors. Of course, in our region, of course, the threats are bigger there. Of course, the chance of even war, as we saw in Crimea and Donbass, is even bigger there. Therefore, of course, the EU has to focus, together with the US, by the way. We need just a strong alliance of Washington and Brussels, and then I hope we will be able to see stronger security and prosperity in the region. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Yuria. Good point. Pete, you have the floor, please.
Thank you. Once again, I would acknowledge that I really did not hear a lot of content that was necessarily directed at us, but I would say my observations over this entire conference have been very positive, and I would like to offer my success to each of you who've taken time to be here. It is important that you be successful. It's important that you move forward together, but individually. And I will tell you that we have great confidence in every one of you, but recognize the United States has a huge role to play in each of your countries. We respond to what was said out of Albania with their revolution, their velvet revolution that ended up causing proper changes in their country. We want to be a part of what you're doing, and I hope the United States is viewed as a very favorable, in a favorable way, because we care about your success and your dream.
Thank you very much, Pete. Tamara, please, you have the floor.
Thank you for all the comments and for supporting the idea of, for stressing the need for perspective. Also, in terms of values, of course, we understand it goes without saying. We all know what the European Union is based on, and this is what attracts us. I mean, we want to be part of that, and we understand that there is the way to go. We are not saying, I'm not saying that Georgia is ready for membership now. What we are talking as a perspective, and perspective doesn't mean that you are ready today. It just means that you have a chance, if you qualify, if you satisfy the criteria to become the member of the club. And if you have that perspective, that of course helps you to attain the results that you want to have. And to go to the question on from the Netherlands, that was very important that it was stressed how important it is to show that these reforms are the genuine will of the people, and they are not something which is done only because EU is requesting to do something. It goes also without saying that that is so, because these reforms are not easy, but these are, for us, the integration process is not an end in itself. It is the means to transform our country into what we want this to become, into a modern European state, and we understand what it takes. We also want you all to understand that we have come a long way. Georgia has transformed a lot and has achieved a lot. We are often talking about corruption, and sometimes I think it is a cliche to think about corruption as an obvious problem for all the post-Soviet. We don't like to be post-Soviet, to be called post-Soviet country, by the way, because it's been a long time ago and we want to forget that past. But the thing is, Georgia has broken away from this tradition of being a corrupt state a long time ago, and we want this to be recognized. Look at the markers at the international rankings in terms of corruption and rule of law and other economic freedoms. Georgia ranks quite high, and it ranks even higher than some of the member states sometimes. So recognize the merits. Let's think about joint engagement and the future together. And thank you, Poland, for also mentioning the need for new tools. If the political decision is not yet ready, there should at least be some economic means to engage better and to help us to prepare ourselves better for being a better partner in the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tamar, for these convincing arguments. I would like first to invite Armand Yegoyan to have a brief reaction and to invite at the end Christian to take the floor.
Thank you very much. I would like to blend all of the questions into one response. So about the future of Europe. So the main question that now stands in the neighborhood as well as in the EU as such is, what does the EU want? Does it want to become a global power? Does it want to spread the area of freedom, security, and justice beyond its border or not? If yes, then the EU should go beyond its borders by all its tools and having in regard the specificities of all the neighboring regions. In my understanding, in my view, otherwise the EU will not be able to become global or more global power, which will spread its influence beyond its borders. And as was mentioned here, the issue of security now stands very sharply on the borders of the EU. And if the EU wants to tackle this issue, to manage this issue, the EU should invest in security. Invest as a project, and not only border the area of security by the official borders of the EU. That was my remark, and having in mind also the turbulence, the military turbulence of our region, I would urge to address this issue as well, also using the normative power of the EU. Thanks.
Thank you. And now, Christian, please.
Thank you, Titus. I would start by saying that it was a very interesting discussion and interesting ideas have been launched. Very briefly, I do not want to miss the opportunity to congratulate our Macedonian colleagues and also the colleagues from Greece for what they've done, because the achievement they've done sent a very strong positive signal from the region. And I think if we continue that way, the feeling in the EU about enlargement will change. If EU sees countries that are really dedicated to solve the issues between themselves, to make reforms, it will be much easier to make the big step to first of all, for Macedonia, Albania, to Northern Macedonia and Albania to start negotiations in June. I hope that will be achieved, and then to progress quickly towards the membership. And our Croatian colleague mentioned the idea of maybe reflect on the current enlargement process. I would be very careful on discussing intermediate degree, honestly, because that might be seen by those who are against the enlargement as a way to avoid a full integration of those countries in the EU. But we could really discuss ideas of, for example, giving the opportunity of countries to join sectoral policies, or why not security and defense, for example, I don't know, maybe customs union, other areas, so that enlargement becomes not a high jump, but a gradual process of inclusion. I totally agree with the colleague from Albania. It's not really about enlargement, but rather inclusion of those countries. Of course, all these countries, Eastern Neighborhood and Western Balkans, are European countries, but the step to become part of the European Union is really complicated, and it needs efforts on both sides. As I said, I'm an optimist, and if we continue the way we started last year, in the next presidencies and the next years, we'll see concrete results. And if you allow me, Titus, one sentence on Eastern Partnership as well. I fully agree with Mrs. Boroviec that we need to further offer new opportunities for cooperation and integration to those countries that want to do that. And we have to be more inventive on this as well. We could, Yuri, really not differentiate too much between those countries from the Eastern Neighborhood and Western Balkans. You all want to be part of the EU one day, and our approach should be similar. We are part of different policies, but if the goal is the same, that we need to offer more to those of you that want really to be closer to the EU. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christian. Not to mention anymore the fact that these countries, they have European identity and they have European vocation. Now, in 30 seconds, if possible, one answer to the question that was raised by the British colleague on security. Different levels of challenges, different types of security challenges. As concern EU, we should do what we must do as concern the common defense and security policy within our European family. We should discuss also on the European industry, military industry, but with the nuance that this game should be equal and valid for all the member states. And we should do this avoiding mistakes and not duplicating things, because we have NATO and this is complementary, and we should rely on a very strong and positive cooperation with NATO. So finally, we reached the end of this extremely interesting panel. I would like to thank you, first of all, for proving the patience and interest and contributions to our debate. And of course, I would like to thank our colleagues, members of the panel from Europe and from the United States for their distinguished and extremely valuable contribution. Thank you very much. And now we are following directly with the final remarks, conclusions, and the adoption of the declaration. Thank you.
I can show you that that's a fact.
Da. Lovely to just.
Dear friends, Our conference, as you know very well, was not intended to get solutions here on place for all European and global issues. Better to start long-term reflections on European Union future, on our relations, and to build bridges between us. And we challenge you to take over the relay and to organize a next debate on the long-term future. But, there is a but. Too many times we used to meet to discuss seriously, very serious things, and nobody from the other institutions listening to us. We became a kind of elected bureaucrats. We came, meet, speak, and leave. This time, we have invited the Minister of European Affairs as an official voice of Romanian presidency of the Council to receive our message and to address the conference on behalf of the presidency. We'd like you consensually to endorse this message, to create at least the idea that legislators are stronger and that we came here because we want to be involved in shaping the European future. And, of course, to send publicly a message that citizens we represent have voices speaking on their behalf. Please, Titus.
Very briefly, because I already spoke too much in the previous panel, just 2 or 3 sentences. Our idea after this conference, or at the end of this conference, was to offer a platform of enriching us, having access to much more information, more assessments, more views expressed by our partners, by the member states, of course. And I think this is coming, and it's extremely important, this is coming from members of the national parliaments. Extremely important. The idea of this declaration that we are submitting for the adoption that was circulated, we tried to accommodate as many amendments as possible that were presented by some of the delegations. This declaration is not an international treaty, is not a legally binding document, but it's a sign, it's a political sign, and this is why we propose to adopt this declaration that is subject to a parliamentary conference to be put it on the table of the heads of states and governments in the Sibiu summit on 9th of May. It's important to offer food for thought. It can be taken into consideration, it can be rejected, only partially to be taken into consideration. But I think from a political point of view, as the national parliaments of the EU member states, and of course of our partners, to have a say. And this was the philosophy of this declaration, which is not really an extremely ambitious draft. It's something that is balanced, is including different elements that are part of our previous work within the European Union. And I think it's a normal political thing that from the national parliaments to our governments or head of states to have an offer. And I will end this intervention thanking you once again for your presence, first of all in Bucharest. We know it's an important period for the member states preparing for European elections, and we appreciated the fact that you took your time and your energy, and you brought a very important contribution to our conference. Thank you very much.
You could take the main floor. Yeah, it is better, I believe.
So, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, I'm very pleased to be here to attend the closing of the Interparliamentary Conference on the Future of the European Union. Thank you so much for Chair Senator Gabriela Crețu, Minister Titus Coloțean, Chair Tilver for inviting me. You know, this is an important event on the road to Sibiu. I think we are at the end of 2 days of debates, on substantial debates, and I think this is this event should be dedicated about the future of European project. It's very important to mention that the first presidency of the Council of the European Union that is held by Romania coincides with the decisive, has a decisive period in the reflection process on the future of the EU. This is about the time we are discussing the strategic agenda for 2019-2024. This is why the visions which are presented in this event, together with all the other contributions and and views that were present in the debates long before that, would have an important impact about the summit of Sibiu and as well about the way the European leaders would decide the strategic priorities of the Union. Ne apropiem de momentul la care rezultatele dezbaterilor purtate la nivel european sau național ne vor permite să formulăm o viziune comună asupra.
So, it is essential that this vision to correspond to the aspirations of the member states, to the communitary institutions, and especially to the expectations of the European citizens. It is the same important that these contributions to resonate with our aspirations at the global level in order to solidly articulate the ambitions of the European Union with the third. Your contributions reflected in the declaration that you have adopted with this occasion for a stronger European Union, more cohesive, more inclusive, and more relevant on the global stage, reaches key aspects of the European Union. Let's not forget that this project has been set up by the founding fathers in order to assure peace and stability for the citizen. That's why I'm convinced that each type of initiative to rethink this project, any proposal regarding the future of the EU, must be inspired by the values, sustainable assuring of peace and prosperity. We are in front of an election exercise, the elections for the Parliament, European Parliament, and activities for raising the awareness during your campaign can be not only opinion formers, but also the architects of solid bridges between citizens and the Union. You can contribute to a better knowledge of the terms at national level, to a modeling of some solutions for the future. More than this, you can help in order to strengthen the credibility in the European project in the relation with the citizens. I salute in this sense the clear message of the declaration adopted by you, by which you underline the relevance of the EU citizens, but also the importance of their support in order to continue the reforming efforts and consolidation of the Union. You have thus an important role, especially now at the 9th round of direct elections. We all know that these elections are crucial and their results will mark decisively the future of Europe. I refer here to the counterfeit, to the fighting against the fake news within the Europe. As you know, for the Romanian presidency at the European Council, we have to fight against the lack of information and the sharing of wrong information. All these are faced also with the differences between North and South, West, West, but also to the radicalization of political speeches, deepening the gaps without offering in exchange solution. All this can be fought with pro-European messages, new, convincing, built in a constructive logic, and able to refer to what has done the European Union for the citizens. There are many things that we have to speak about and we don't do it. The European Union has changed our daily life. Ladies and gentlemen, the Romanian presidency at the European Council was seen as a principle to guide our steps in the political and economical and social sectors. European Union is a successful model based on a unique concept at global level. When we are talking about a sustainable future of the European Union, we refer to its consolidation, to the structure, to finance in a more cohesive way this project. What we want is to revigor the project of European integration in a moment in which the Union faces a lot of difficulties difficulties like the perspective of Brexit as a traumatic experience for the overall of the European Union. No matter the consequences and the end of this process, in front of such challenges, the only answer remains, as until now, cohesion and unity. The decisions regarding the future of the European Union has to be supported by a consistent reflection and by an appropriate financing. The multi-annual financial framework is a high priority of the Romanian presidency. It is essential to offer a balance between policies able to offer real solutions for the future challenges. In the same time, the Romanian presidency proposes to impulse progress in financial, fiscal and economical sectors, aims to follow the stimulating of growth, structural reforms in the benefit of the member state and of the citizens. In the same time, taking into account the objective of Romania to access Eurozone, it is important to support the efforts for an economic and monetary solid union, facilitating the process of integration. Let's not forget that the Romanian presidency has already produced results. We have an impressive number of files that we have succeeded to close, and thus we put our fingerprint on how the economy will look like in the future years and how the European citizens will perceive the support that they have to give by its regulation regarding the labor conditions, strategic decisions, and I refer here to the gas decision, taxing policies. I refer here to the directive aiming the copyrights in the digital space. Ladies and gentlemen, any type of discussion regarding the future of Europe should include the dimension of the Europe and external policies, moreover those directed to the neighborhood. The role of the EU has to start from the neighborhood, and these policies are key instruments of the action of the European Union and has to be reflected in the configuring of the next strategy. That's why it will be for us important to use the new legislation and Commission in order to strengthen the relation between the EU and the neighborhood. Regionally, we can state that common challenges cannot be faced otherwise but in tight cooperation with our partners. From this perspective, the extension policy, and I refer here to the Western Balkans, to Turkey, to the Eastern neighborhood, remain of utmost importance for the aspiring member state. In the same time, to maintain the interest of EU in the region and to encourage tangible progress from the part of the candidates remain essential for the credibility of the process. Evolutions like the recent entrance in force of the Prespa agreement represent real proofs that we can generate successful facts in the region. The commitment of EU in the extension policy is a long-term one, and we hope to be built on common values. Let's not forget that when we have an exercise like Brexit, the fact that there are so many countries knocking at the doors of the EU, that in the same time we will succeed. We hope during our presidency to bring a new momentum in the extension process, represent the answer that we have to give as Council of the European Union regarding the challenges coming from the Brexit, but also from other things that have happened lately. Our partners in the region are part of the future of the EU. The presidency of Romania has always acted in order to stimulate the dialogue with them, and it is important that it is important to emphasize the reforms and to support their European endeavor. In this regard, I have recently met ministers of European integration of all the candidate members on the 11th of March, and I forwarded the messages on the 19th of March. Regarding the eastern neighborhood of the Union, 2020 will mean a higher commitment. We will have to offer to the three states with which we concluded the association agreement and free trade, Republic of Moldova, Ukraine, and Georgia, a new perspective regarding the development with the EU, able to motivate their efforts regarding the EU. We will have also to use at maximum the opportunities opened for Belarus, Armenia, and Azerbaijan, and also to the neighbors of the neighbors, the states from Central Asia. We cannot refer to external actions of the EU without underlying identifying the closest partner for Romania and for EU, the United States. This cross-border relation remains a partnership based on common values with solid grounds, but also with very important political cooperation. The context global, marked more and more by connection, but in the same time by things regarding to volatility and context, generate a series of challenges affecting the cross-border dialogue and the convergence of this. That is why it is the role of the presidency of Romania to assure the viability of these special relations, being aware not only of the reciprocal context, but also by the fundamental role of this partnership in solving the global problems.
The transatlantic relationship is essential, and we, as holder of the presidency, we will continue to consolidate this partnership. The declarations signed today provide a cohesive, all-inclusive vision that will inspire, hopefully, both the votes of the 26th of May as well as the future strategic aims, starting from these essential keywords: cohesion, credibility outside, and trust inside. I would like to conclude by saying that I once again thank for the invitation launched. It is very important that together we build the same type of vision. It's essential to have as many stakeholders as possible in the future development of the EU, because it is only via debates that we can get somewhere. We can find solutions that are not only credible, but lead to the consolidation of the European Union, something that Romania wishes to see happening, and it is one of our aims as holding the rotating presidency of the European Council. So all these ideas will be reiterated in the conference in Sibiu in May. Of course, the summit in Sibiu will not be the end of the debates. The debates will continue on the future of Europe. The only thing that remains to be adopted there refers to the strategy. The debates will continue. There are elections for a new parliament, and there will be future developments in the area of international relations. Thank you.
The Chamba for his presence, his contribution, and also for the speed of transmitting the message, which reflects, and this is very serious, a certain speed and, with modesty, a certain level of efficiency of the current presidency of the EU Council, that in only 3 months succeeded to finalize more than 80 files, 80 dossiers. Some of them extremely complex and some of them extremely delicate, by the way. Thank you very much, Minister. And now, before giving the floor for the final remarks of the conference to Gabriela Crețu, I would like, based on our discussions, very fruitful discussions yesterday and today, to submit to your endorsement the text of the declaration. And if there are no obstacles, I would like to consider, yes, I was expecting one intervention. Please, you have the floor, sir.
Thank you very much. I have one amendment in Article 11, shift the half sentence, boosting Europeans' overall security in the end, and in the end of this article, and add a sentence. On top of that, ambition neighborhood policy is essential for boosting Europeans' overall security. It corresponds to the discussion today, And I think when we think about enlargement of NATO, we are in geopolitical trap. EU isn't in this situation. It could be more courage. On the other hand, very important is to, it was noticed by the Minister Lenka from Moldavia, to clean perspective for the citizen of West Balkans and Eastern Partnership. And also, when we think about China and about Silk Road, I think that Black Sea will be more and more important, and therefore Eastern Partnership, West Balkan, thinking about enlargement is very important factor. And therefore, please accept my amendment. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, colleague, for these comments. Let me have some a brief reaction. On the national capacity, I will fully endorse your amendment. But there are two options. Either we discuss in the plenary, which is a little bit unusual amendments. It was time and number of delegations submitted amendments that were accommodated to the text, and we might open the Pandora box for some other discussions. Either we try to take the consensus on a balanced approach. It's not the extreme ambitious, it's not something which represents nothing. It's a balanced approach which is sending a political signal from our national parliaments to the summit of the head of states and governments. So with this comment, I will ask you to accept my approach and to try to reach a consensus and to send a political message to the summit. Thank you for the understanding. A second comment from the Dutch delegation, I suppose.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Dear colleagues, the Dutch delegation highly values the interesting discussions about the future of the European Union we had yesterday and today. And thanks again to the Romanians for inviting us and organizing this conference. However, we think that the conference should not be concluded with a common declaration, because although it's a very interesting conference, this is not an official interparliamentary forum like COSAC, and because not all 28 delegations are represented here in Bucharest. So therefore, I want to state for a fact that the delegation, the Dutch delegation, will not consent the declaration, and I would like to ask you to indicate this when you publish the declaration or communicate about the declaration. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comment. I will do the same after the Polish intervention, having a brief statement. It's true, and precisely because this is not a COSAC meeting with formal rules, formal majorities, and so on. I think we should think in political terms about our political message. If you insist about putting in the acts of the meeting, the conference, your position, of course, we will respect this. But I think, nevertheless, it's extremely important to launch from the national parliament a political signal before the summit that will take place on 9th of May. But of course, I will respect if you insist on that. There are two other, was precisely addressing now to my Polish colleague. Now we are opening a discussion that, if possible, I would like to end positively as soon as possible. There were two colleagues signaling me. It was the first colleague from a Baltic state, I think, and another colleague from this side, please. I would like to excuse the minister that have a flight to catch for another European meeting. Thank you.
I have to stress only one thing. It is not a declaration of European parliaments. It is not a declaration of member states' parliaments. It is the declaration of this conference to give a signal. Only this. And imperative mandate, it doesn't exist. And the summit in Sibiu is informal as well, and nobody would have reserves in taking decision on our behalf. So please, to endorse this declaration in order to our citizens get this signal, symbolical one, that we were here and we send a message to our executive leaders that we want to be involved in shaping the future. Please. Yeah, yeah.
So it's, after this convincing statement of Gabriela, if you still want to take the floor, please, you have the floor.
Thank you for organizing this conference. And of course, the national delegations had the opportunity to send amendments to this declaration. But unfortunately, we haven't had a discussion about these amendments, and we see that, for example, our amendments haven't been taken in consideration. And that's the reason why I see no possibility to add our signature to this declaration. If we can't discuss these amendments, then of course we cannot find a consensus on this.
Thank you.
Belgium delegation sent.
We're from Letony.
Letony.
And your
No, I would
comments haven't been included because I worked on the final text and I tried to introduce everything coherent. When being two proposals, opposing proposals, we tried to find a balance. For this reason, some of you, as my dear Polish colleague, haven't found the wording on the text. But we try to take into account all of you and your reserves, including your reserves, because we avoided to put content, only our approach, not the content, because we are very much aware that we belong to different political groups, that we haven't discussed in plenary or at least in our committees the topic. Yes, we are aware of, but we are here not for nothing.
Yes, that's what I want.
Yeah, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to add one thing. We all talk about the democratic issues that we have in Europe, and actually I think the role of Member of Parliament is so important.
Yeah.
By not taking actions, by not acting. I am not here on a touristic visit. Yeah. I would do anything else then. It was all beautiful. I think it's very important to be respectful towards our mandate. I am a Member of Parliament. This is a text. I could amend it too. But I think it's very important to give a general signal to the government, to the European Union, with a document. Otherwise, we could talk also in the cafe at the bar. Yeah. So I think it's important to do a political action in our own name, not in name of my government, not in name of my parliament, but in name of myself as a member of the parliament, as an inhabitant and a responsible inhabitant of the European Union. Thank you for this one.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, dear colleague.
As well, only one idea. Before the summit, there are all kinds of forums sending messages to the summit, not with legitimate representatives of citizens. All kinds of forums joining together, NGOs, different kind of organized civil society, etc. And we don't want to express our political will being legitimate representatives. I don't believe that is good.
Well, Madam Chair, I think the message was clear, and I appreciate and I respect all the interventions, and I appreciate the intervention of Belgium. There is still one colleague raising the flag, please.
Yes, please. I will take it very shortly. We have the same statement from the Swedish delegation as our friends from the Netherlands.
Okay, thank you. So we are going to take note in the acts, official acts of the conference about this, but I would like to thank India and to all the delegations that were present for your contribution, and to see that we have almost a consensus or on a subject which remains fundamental, a political signal launched by the members of the national parliament towards our governments and heads of states. I think for the democracy, this is extremely important. Thank you once again for attending and contributing to the Bucharest conference. Thank you so much.
Allow us a big applause for you and for your contribution. We highly value. I thank you once again for coming and for being so much involved in debates yesterday and today. Thank you very much.